Hello and welcome to the Comedians OutLuke podcast. This week I am joined by close friend and fellow comedian Joe Tennant. He is a brilliant comedian, but by day he is a specialist in neuroscience. And recently he has been on the show The Story of God, which is narrated and presented by Morgan Freeman. So he speaks all about that in this episode. I really hope you enjoy. I just wonder, at what point did you decide that you wanted to get up on stage and talk?
Yeah, I mean, so I've liked stand-up for a long time. One of the earliest memories of that for me was I guess it was 13 around there.
Yeah.
When Robin Williams' Live on Broadway came out, and I must have listened to that album 50 times. I was just obsessed. That was so funny, and I remember, actually, so I listened to the album a lot. I never watched the actual live performance. And the first time I saw the live performance, I was recovering from surgery at age 16. And I remember really vividly having a morphine button just to help with the pain, and watching that and laughing. And it was intestinal surgery. So if I laughed, it really hurt.
Oh, right.
And I just couldn't help. So I was just pressing the button as much as I could, trying to get through the special, because I was just laughing so hard and so much I liked it. So I've really liked stand-up for a long time, but I never really thought of that as something I'd do until college. So I lived in a dormitory for the first 3 years of college.
Yeah.
And there was an open mic for the dorm, just outside on the stairs, the front patio. And I sort of just wandered up and I was like, give it a shot. Why not? And so
I'm sure there's something you could talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did 2 or 3 things, only because a friend of mine encouraged me and said that you're funny when we talk to you. You should try it out. It went okay. And I sort of that's fun. I could do that again, maybe. Then at the University of Kansas, this is the same university, they had a stand-up comedy sort of competition. It was essentially amateurs at the university come do it. And I thought, you know what, that'd be fun. It was my 3rd gig, I think. And I went into this competition, and it was hosted by, at the time, just a traveling comic, now more of a name, Roy Wood Jr., who is now on The Daily Show. But at the time was just, he's doing the college traveling circuit. And he was basically saving the night as, sophomores and juniors were bombing on stage, where we'd get up and do 5 or 10, and then he'd get up and do 15 and just sort of keep the night going, and then he judged at the end. I didn't win, but it was sort of cool to see someone who's doing it as a job versus just the rest of us morons.
Yeah.
But so then I moved to Chicago. So I'd done a couple of shows in Kansas, not really anything special, but Chicago is a great stand-up scene. And so that's when it really moved from I can do this when there's a random thing on to I'm going to go pursue open mic nights. I'm going to try to do some more stuff. It's grad school, so time was limited, but it became something I really enjoyed doing. That's my night out kind of thing.
So when you came over to the UK, how much did you find the difference between UK comedy and comedy in the US?
There's a lot of things. The first was just how to get on a bill. So in the American stand-up scene, this might be more true in London than Cambridge. But there's an open mic night means you walk up, you put your name on a list, and then just start reading down the list until
at the bar or something.
Yeah. And so, that was very much the dynamic I was used to. And I was also used to there just being an open mic somewhere in the city every night, more 2 or 3, frankly. And so, it was much easier to be impulsive and go do stand-up. Here, the first year I was living in the UK, I didn't do any. Because I didn't really know where in Cambridge to do it. And I didn't really want to travel because I don't drive in this country.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until Josh Masson, who's now living in London doing the London scene, started doing First Laughs, which I've taken over since then. It's an open mic. And I just turned up. I happened to be around the tram when they were doing it. I was like, oh, is there a list? And he says, oh, we book ahead of time. And I went, oh, is that how it works here? And it turns out for a lot of open mics in the UK, you book in a couple of weeks in advance and you get your name on, they bring you in. All that means is you don't have an agent, really. In the US, it's literally, I've seen people walk up off the street. I've seen, I remember a really tense show in Chicago. My friend Cody ran an open mic in Chicago for a bit. This bar called Friar Tuck's. It was kind of a mediocre bar, but it was an all right open mic. The venue was sort of weird for it. It's kind of one of those flat things where you just set up a microphone and we just hope people looked at us. An unhoused man came in off the street and just signed up, and we didn't know who he was. We're just like, oh yeah, and he starts getting into it. He's talking about being unhoused and stuff, and it has this weird edge where some of it was kind of funny, and some of it had a really sort of grim turn. Like this moment, like, you guys don't even know who I am. I could stab all of you. And we're like, please don't. It was very like, it was kind of tense. I mean, but that's the dynamic. Anyone could just show up. Here, it's a little more controlled. Like there's some more vetting.
It's just, I think it's because if you had a fully open mic night and you had like 30 acts come in, it'd be very hard to fit 35 minutes into a set, into a night.
Well, I mean, but like open mics here are more produced.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, in the U.S., like, I mean, I know in Chicago you'll get a list. Like, there's a mic there at Comedy Sports, one of the improv theaters, and it's their Monday Night Chaser. So they have the Monday Night Showcase, and then they do the afterwards of the open mic. So they have a showcase from 7 to 8, and then at 8:30 they just start taking names. And their whole deal is they've never turned anyone away.
Right.
And so you would have 45 comics on the roster, and it would go from 8:30 till 2 in the morning.
Really?
As your audience dwindles and dwindles and dwindles and dwindles. But they do anything for a good stage time because it's a really nice stage. And so the whole game was you would have to wait until about 2:30, finish that set, just like you do this, 3 minutes to no one, and then you're just waiting around because at the end of the night they put the list for next week, and if you're hanging out, you can reserve your earlier spot.
Right.
But then anyone else, like, so if you impulse it, you're like number 20 on the list. But if you're hanging out, you can maybe put it on. But I mean, that's a lot of open mics in the U.S. This is just sort of a marathon of people trying to keep people's attention.
Yeah. And so how much do you change your set, your material, because you're going back to the US soon, so I imagine you'll get back on the scene over there. I just wondered, how much do you alter your set?
A lot, actually. And that was sort of a learning curve for me. Is just why it's hard to know because so much of American media is exported. America does very well culturally of sending stuff out. Everyone's seeing Marvel movies. American media is big, and because of that, I think there's and this is some arrogance on my part, I just assumed a lot of the cultural references I had would be things people would get, just because of how ubiquitous a lot of American culture is. There's a lot of sitcoms that made it over here. It's kind of weird. I can talk about Friends here. Friends was a big American sensation. It was a big international sensation. It's wild. But I had to learn that a lot of the things that I think are funny are just things that people haven't heard of here.
Exactly. So it's hard to be relatable in that sense.
Yeah, I have this joke I really love. This is based on a true story. I had a dream where I was a stagehand on DMX the musical. And it's not like a musical about DMX, but it's like a musical like Sesame Street where there's puppets. And they're running around having problems, hoping DMX will help them. Yeah. And so it'd be like these musical cues. They're like, oh, I can't reach the jam. Won't someone help me reach the jam? And they're like, X gonna give it to you. And like that would be the whole bit. And I thought it was really funny. And some of the other comics think it's really like silly and fun. But I realized like no one, like DMX's profile in the UK is kind of low. Not a lot of people on site recognize a DMX joke.
Do you think you could... Is it possible to change the name of it to make it relatable? Like,
it's so specific.
It's so specific. Yeah.
So I mean, I had to drop it after. Like, so I remember I did it for the third time. Like, okay, I just got to keep. I'll keep workshopping it. I'll tweak it a bit. We'll get there. And but the third time I did it, I actually stopped and said, "Who here knows who DMX is?" Yeah. And a man in the front literally goes, "Is he a rapper, man?"
No way.
I give up. I quit. I'm off it.
Yeah. So if there's something else you're looking forward to doing when you go back to the US, is doing that joke.
So it's one of them. Yeah, it's stuff like that. So my comedy in the UK for me has become a lot more explainy kind of stuff. Yeah. Like, the difference between America and the UK is X. I notice this weird thing about your culture because I'm not part of it. Yeah. And then the big thing is American politics, which is much less sort of the week topical and much more, here's a big story that I think people know they kind of want to understand, but just haven't read up on it.
Yeah. It's a bit annoying when you're doing a short set as well. Yeah. That you have to spend 3 or 4 minutes explaining something before you get to that punchline that it may not land or it could land. It's a bit annoying.
Yeah, I mean that's why I only do the political stuff really for longer sets because there's just not enough time to get into it.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I have a lot of material about the sort of the unfolding Russia scandal and the investigation around the administration's ties or potential collusion, and I think that whole situation is on its face very absurd, and it's honestly, if you're breaking it down, sometimes very funny just in how comically corrupt they are. Like it's so brazen it does make you laugh a little bit. But you have to get into some pretty specific names. You get into the weeds a bit with it. And that's already, I think, probably going to be a little tricky in the US. It's much harder here when people don't know the key players.
Yeah, that's true.
So I have to, I have this joke about this guy, Carter Page. I mean, you maybe have seen this.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and when I first started doing it, I would just sort of break it down and get into the punchline and stuff. And I was just getting like deer in the headlights. And so I rewrote the whole segment to be like, I open with who here knows who Carter Page is, and no one raises their hands. They go, that's the point. You shouldn't have to know who he is.
Yeah, that's true.
But now I'm going to explain why we now need to know who he is and why it's crazy that he's like this. Because it's a wild story.
And it's quite funny because the people, when you go into American politics, people expect you to go straight into the Trump stuff. Yeah. But when you go into someone like Carter, they're like a bit confused. Mm-hmm. But it's funny because of that. They're like, oh, we don't know this guy. I'm expecting to hear about Trump, but now this guy's talking about some other guy. But
I really avoid talking about the president directly. I think it's unhelpful, and nothing you can say as a stand-up is going to match how buffoonish and
he is as a person.
That's his whole brand. And I honestly think it feeds him when we paint him as this larger-than-life figure rather than kind of a sad man who cheats on his wife. Like when you phrase it that way, it sounds really pathetic. But if you really buy into the mythos of him and the bigness, that gives him a lot of power. But if you just think of him as sort of a weird adulterer, he doesn't sound nearly as intimidating.
He's never quite grown up and has got loads of parent issues.
Yeah. So, I mean, but I talk about a lot of the people around him because they're honestly much weirder as people. Yeah. And and unlike him, they're taken much more seriously. And if you peel back the veil even a little bit, you're like, how are any of these people allowed to be in the public life? It's absolutely wild. That's what's fascinating to me.
Yeah, that and I think it's quite interesting that I think there's one thing being Trump, but there's another thing following the man.
Yeah.
And actually believing everything he says and getting behind him and all that sort of stuff. And I always ask myself more questions about them, about why they follow him.
Yeah.
Aside from the obvious that he's rich and they can get rich off him. But
that's I think what's interesting about the administration is how much grift is involved and how many of these people are pretending to be true believers but are really just running a scam. I mean, you have Michael Cohen, his personal lawyer, longtime fixer, now, turning state's witness and testifying about all these crimes.
Well, 90% of them are going to end up in prison.
They are. Many of them are already on their way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like Michael Cohen was, working with the president, being very loyal to the president, but he was only doing it so he could sell access, and he admitted to trying to do that.
Yeah.
That's a scam. I think Roger Stone has done a good job of scamming this presidency by being close to the president and then using that to get media appearances that he gets paid for, and so then he's getting all these paid appearances, making a lot of money doing that. Paul Manafort was doing the same with illegal lobbying. He's facing so much jail time. That's one bit I can do is just how much jail time Paul Manafort is facing, because you only need to know a little bit about him to know it's legitimately funny how much time he was looking for. I call it the Paul Manafort game, where I just ask people how much jail time is a lot of jail time. I just keep going up toward the original max sentence he was facing, and no one's ready for it because it's 305 years. It's so much jail time.
Yeah.
America hasn't been a country that long.
No, that's not officially, no. So it's not comedy related, but you've been on The Story of God with Morgan Freeman. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so that's going to air in America in like 3 days. So I actually haven't seen the footage yet, which is scary. And then it airs in the UK a bit later. Like the whole thing's surreal. I had the moment yesterday. I realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to be on Netflix. Like you can watch a Netflix show and my face will be there for a minute. But yeah, no. So this is my real job. I do research in psychology on religion, and we have been doing research on mystical experience in epilepsy. So people whose seizures have a mystical component to them. And we did a public talk that got a little radio attention, which is very exciting for us. And that happened to be spotted by Nat Geo. So this was in November of 2018.
Yeah.
And they reached out to us sort of last minute, like, we've been trying to find someone on this subject. Are you available? Can you bring one of your patients, put us in contact? And kind of I went down with no expectations. The night before, I found out that I was going to be explaining my research to Morgan Freeman. It's kind of surreal to have a professional TV shoot and do all that. Like, they check your hair, they give you your mark,
and you got to meet God as well.
People have been making that joke. He's an interesting guy. It is sort of surreal because he has narrated so many things that you have the first minute of meeting Morgan Freeman is getting used to the idea that your life is not being narrated. You're just talking to a guy. Because you're just so used to thinking of this sort of larger than life figure, and he's a guy. He's a very tall man, but he is at the end of the day a human being, and so like getting comfortable just like calling him by his first name like he prefers, and sort of just chatting like it was sort of weird for a minute. Got there eventually. He's nice.
So did you get to speak to him much around that? Like, obviously you did the shoot and everything, but did you have time to like sort of just speak to him in general?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, because it's one of those things where like, you have a lot of in-between takes. I had to reset some cameras, getting mic'd up, stuff like that. So, I mean, just the actual production of the show meant that we had some downtime. And so, like, the whole premise of our segment was him essentially asking me questions about the research and asking the patient about some of their experiences, and us just kind of breaking it down and him just sort of explaining it. So like it was a very casual conversation. And sometimes they'd have us repeat stuff because they, could you repeat that a little slower? Could you clarify that term? But I mean, it was for the most part kind of like this conversation here. But as a consequence,
I've been compared to Morgan Freeman, so I'm happy. Well, so some of the listeners will think that because the person I'm speaking to now has met Morgan Freeman, that I have direct access to Morgan Freeman. No. I don't have his number.
No, nor do I.
So don't even try that one, because it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and don't try it with me too, because again, I just kind of showed up and they're like, "Here, talk to this person."
Yeah,
it's not how it works.
I know he said once in an interview that he'd given up hard drugs. He won't do any more hard drugs, but he'll never give up cannabis.
Yeah,
because it's one of God's creations. So he said he just, at that age, you might as well just carry on.
We talked a little bit about cannabis in the context of epilepsy, because it was just that week the UK had said go ahead with cannabis oil trials.
To help with
epilepsy prevention. So we got into that a little bit. And it was kind of there was a bit of a wink and nod jokiness to the conversation, but that's not something that's particularly like, oh, starstruck. That's just a conversation with a guy who had sort of valued that as part of pain reduction and was eager to have that access to other people.
So bringing it back to comedy a bit, considering this is a comedy podcast. Now I'm under pressure to be funny. I just want to get into a bit about your worst gig you've ever done, like when you've really come off and you thought, wow, why do I even do this?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's some competition for that.
Is there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do, like I said, I do a lot of open mics when I can get it, especially in Chicago, where it's really just, do I have the time for this right now?
Yeah.
I had a couple of really bad ones. What are some of the worst ones? So one of them, I was at this bar and they allowed dogs. I'm allergic to dogs. I was already having kind of a bad time. And it was a place I'd never been before for an open mic. And it was like a random Tuesday. I was like, I'm just going to go do it. I want to get out and do something. And there was a very different sort of comedy crowd. Chicago's a big scene. There's a lot of people there.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize anyone. And usually I can spot at least one person I've seen around before, but this was it was a weird alien sort of group. And there was a lot of much more race-based materials, a lot more drug-based material. Right, a lot of people talking about, like, I was on coke doing this. Just stuff that was never part of the scene I was used to. And I'm on later in the list, and a lot of the audience has already been walked.
Yeah.
And I just remember doing this material, and there was one person who was one of the comics, and she was just kind of nodding. And I was like, that's the best reaction I'm going to get, is someone going, oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
Just because I wasn't, doing like drug material stuff. It's just like, it was really out of my element. I felt really uncomfortable because I was trying to not.
The silence is worse than anything.
The silence is rough, but also just feeling like you're doing material that's so inaccessible to just like different. It was for me a very sort of big. It was a big shock to me, because I was really used to these comedy rooms where there's a bit more of an alt vibe to it, people trying out a bit more conceptual stuff, and he was really sort of street level, like, we're doing race, we're doing drugs, we're doing farts, and there's nothing wrong with necessarily, but I was really like, I don't know how to interact with this.
How early on in doing comedy was this for you?
This would have been like 2011, so this would have been about 3 years in.
Okay.
But I started out doing stuff at my university, and I was picking open mics that I could get to, and so I'd curated for myself sort of a bubble. I mean, this is the first time it really popped. I just realized, like, oh my God, I've been picking my spots pretty carefully, and that's not an option when you're doing just stand up full time. And that was one of the times I really stopped and thought, like, I don't know if I could do this as a career. For every really cool gig in a cafe or something, there's going to be a really rowdy gig where no one cares what I'm doing and aren't interested in it.
Well, so you're 3 years in. I just wonder if, because one of the things that I notice doing comedy is actually being in a room before your set, long before you go on, is really helpful to read sort of what's gauging reaction. So you said that you went in there and there was a kind of specific type of comedy that was working. Yeah. Do you think if you were to do that again, would you try and read the room a bit and try and just improvise and do bits off that, or
maybe? I mean, so this is part of it's like. It was the perspectives being presented were just so different from mine that I really felt just like out of my element. I felt out of my depth. Like, I've never done any recreational drugs apart from some drinking. So like, I have no way to access that. I can't do it. In terms of the race stuff, this wasn't people talking about their racial perspective. I can work with that. I'm used to doing some of that material. I do some of that myself. Yeah. I'm half Puerto Rican, even though I don't look it at all. But this was like a lot of white people making jokes about other races. And it was really uncomfortable. I mean, I remember pretty vividly, this one guy, his whole joke was, he said, it's like, I was on a flight recently, and there was this guy, he came on and he had a turban and a beard, and he gave this like sort of pained look like, uh-oh, to the crowd. And there was some like mixed chuckles. I'm like, that's just a very racist thing you did, my dude. Like, all you did was racially profile a Sikh. Why are you talking about this like it's some sort of great joke? And, people were into that. But like, for me, I was immediately like, I hate this and I hate you for doing this. How am I going to make this crowd laugh if they like this? Like, that felt very weird to me. I mean, I had a similar experience in Edinburgh when I was there last year, where this guy did a set, and the whole joke for him was, I was having sex with this woman, and I during it I slipped off the condom because I don't like condoms. Come on, guys, you've done it before. I'm like, no, you raped a woman and you just told everyone on stage. Yeah, that's just horrifying. Yeah, and thankfully for that one, the crowd was not on board with it either. Okay, like, everyone immediately recognized. There's only 7 people in a room, but everyone immediately recognized that this was a nightmare. And like, he sort of walked off sheepishly, and he tried to do another bit about it. Like, he's talking about, now I'm thinking like, whoa, did I get anything from her? And the dude in the crowd literally went like, dude, that's rape and it's your fault. Like, that's the kind of heckle you're getting. You need to fucking quit comedy, Yeah. So I mean, you get horrifying stuff like that, and those are the rooms where I feel like I don't need to do this for a career. This is terrible. But then sometimes you have great ones, and that's super worth it. I remember there was another show in Chicago where this guy was running an open mic. It was one of the only Friday open mics I could find, really, which was exciting. Because I use a lot of real shows on Friday. So the open mics are a little far in between. And this guy, he brought up his girlfriend to do some stand-up. And she was the second person on. And she gets into like, I'm from the American South. And then she says the N-word. Oh. And she's a white lady. And she goes, and everyone kind of freezes. She goes, no, it's fine. I'm from the South. I can say that. And I could really see like the vibe of the room was, that's the opposite of the truth. Especially you can't say that. You're the worst person to say that. And it got deadly silent, and she floundered for a minute and then just left. Like, not like got off stage, like visibly left the bar. Oh, really? And it was really awkward. And the guy goes up, he's like, all right, our next comic is Joe Tennant. I was like, I can't do anything here. Like, that was maybe the worst introduction I've ever gotten.
Yeah, and that's a little bit weak as the MC, actually, because I think a decent, well, I'm sure he was a good MC, but I'm sure if I was MCing that one, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to have to do at least 5 minutes of like warming them back up a bit.
Well, I mean, this is a guy who's trying to go find his girlfriend. He was ready to get out of there to find her. So, like, he just kind of abandoned the show because his girlfriend did something racially insensitive.
That actually gets me onto an interesting topic. How much do you censor your material when you're writing? Because obviously, clearly, she's got absolutely no filter between brain and stage. I
don't know about censor, but I definitely try to, when I write a joke about subjects that are a bit more sensitive, I try to think, what's the point of this? Like, what am I actually saying here? Because, when you talk about politics, you talk about questions of race, or I do jokes about, like, feminism and gender. Like, not, like, I'm thinking, is this a joke about the weirdness that is the way we've constructed like masculinity, or is this a joke that kind of just makes fun of feminism? Because I want to make sure that I don't want to do the second one. And I think when you're playing around with like, you know, dudes doing things, you can sort of bump up against some of these tropes unironically. Sorry, you can bump up against them accidentally.
Yeah.
Like I have a bit about a weird experience I had in a strip club. And, you know, I was sort of like, I don't know how comfortable I am as a feminist at a strip club, and got bought a lap dance out of spite.
Yeah.
And so, I've gone back and forth on this joke because it's for me, what I'm trying to do is talk about how, you know, it's good to be a feminist, but when you're in all male spaces, there is a lot of pressure to kind of put those ideas aside.
Yeah.
And that can be a little, that you can sort of feel that pressure, and it kind of sucks. But a lot of the humor of it is also how weird this stripper was. And so, like, you know, am I making fun of sex workers when I do that bit? I'm trying not. That's not the plan. It's just like this whole situation is weird and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. So what you're doing is you're not segregating or diminishing someone doing a particular job. Yeah. What's funny about what you're doing is the scenario around that. So imagine me as a feminist now in a very awkward situation where I'm sitting in a strip club having to be a man, because there are stereotypes to being a man, so everything around that is funny, and that's fine. I think that's fine. I think if that was taken out of context, then maybe it would be offensive, but that's only if it's taken out of context.
But when we had this question of censoring, I just had to stop and reflect, like, you know, who am I actually, who is this joke actually about? Who am I targeting with this joke? Is this fair? Because, you know, I think you can do stand-up about most subjects, but you need to be careful that you're not going after communities that are already suffering. And you need to, if you're not sure, ask. Like, that's something that I try to make a point of. If I'm going to do a joke about X or Y and I know someone in that affected community, I'm like, hey, is this like over the line? I don't think it is, but like, I want to double check. And I think there's only one time I've really had someone go like, hey, you may want to just drop this. And like, you know, you just listen to those communities, listen to the people in your life who are like, you don't need to do that joke. This is not appropriate. Like, I remember it was when around just like very early on, like a little bit after Britney Spears had like shaved her head.
Yeah.
And I had this joke like, oh gosh, Britney Spears, she's shaving her head. Like, oh gosh, she thinks she's a lesbian now. And my friend of mine was like, hey, like, not a lesbian shave their heads and it's not automatic. I'm like, oh, well, no, I'm saying she doesn't get that. Like, she thinks she is, even though she's not. And they're like, yeah, but it's not coming off like that. And I was like, okay, fair enough. And I just dropped it. Like, it's not that big of a deal to have critique and listen and not do it.
It's really difficult to talk about comedy in America because it does vary from state to state. So we're talking about it in a very generalized way, really. But one of the common things in America is what the fuck's up with this guy? You know, you can do that sort of stuff and it goes down well. And for a long time in America, people would be annoyed if you didn't do the classic joke that you used to do. So people want that repetition, a bit like how people repeat songs, you know.
Yes.
Whereas in the UK, we're constantly trying to have to do new stuff, or if we're going to the same places, we're always battling with not wanting to be old or tired on our stuff. And how would you advise someone from the UK going into like American comedy? How would you prep them for stand up there?
I would tell them to be ready for a little more audience interaction. And it's not going to be say something funny. Like, that doesn't happen. Like, in the US, people are just going to kind of, like, hecklers in the US are going to be a bit more, A, direct to you, and B, it's going to be a little more about the material. Like, they're going to talk up. And just be ready for it. It's okay. A lot of times you can shut it down pretty easily. And it's not everybody, but it's some people. I think the second thing would be, you don't need to worry about whether you've done the same material or not. Like, really, I think unless you're a touring pro, you can assume for the most part that unless your friends are in the audience, a lot of people haven't seen you perform before.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And it's okay to do some safe stuff. Like, as long as you're having fun, I think it's fine. Honestly. Like, if you're enjoying yourself on set, that energy sort of comes out. Like, people enjoy it, will go along with you. It's really when you start getting tense that people don't like it. And third, I guess the one big difference for American comedy is they want. I think there's more of a cry for authenticity.
Right.
I think in the UK you can come in and be like, I'm doing a set. This is my bit. Here's my long list of puns, or here's my alliterative like 2-minute rant section. Yeah. And people are very on board for that sort of setup. They're eager for a character. Like there's a level of artifice that's very tolerated here that I think people have less patience for in the US. Like characters or stuff like that is sort of the domain of sketch comedy. And if you're doing stand-up, a lot of stand-up in the US is about authentic takes on stuff and being you. And that's not everybody, obviously. Some people do very well. So
you're just telling your personality more than anything, you think?
Yeah, well, like you don't need to, like, you're performing, but you need to, I think And this is maybe just my nonsense perspective because of the way Chicago is, but I think there's a lot more interest and emphasis on authenticity. And some of this parallels hip hop culture where you're supposed to write all your own set, like much like if you don't write your own like rhymes in hip hop culture, you're kind of a faker and people don't like it. Yeah. If you borrow any material in the US, like you're kind of a scumbag.
Really?
Yeah, like you can't be doing the same stuff. You got to be variation. You got to do a lot of your own thing. You got to be original. Yeah. I think you can do a similar type of set to people in the UK, and people have more tolerance for it.
So observational humour works a lot better in the US because in the UK we're very much the butt of the joke often. So we go on stage and then the way we legitimise what we're talking about is by saying it's from my perspective. This happened to me, so you can laugh at me. Rather than targeting people.
Well, so that's a good one. I'm glad you raised that, because something I noticed here that is self-deprecating humor works well here.
Yeah.
In America, I have some friends who really like doing sort of the self-deprecating style, and they're more influenced by the UK scene.
Yeah.
And they would try to do these self-deprecating jokes, and people would just go, "Oh," like there's like there's an intense sympathy, and it's hard to get your material going if you're trying to make fun of yourself when people are being really sympathetic and like, "Oh, buddy, are you okay?" It's like, no, this is a bit. You can laugh. Like a lot of comics who are trying to do stuff like that have to say like, it's okay, you can laugh, because like I said, there's this you're being presented as like who you are. There's this cry for authenticity. So when you're like talking about something sad, people are really like, "Oh no, buddy," and that level of like,
I have a shrink you could speak to.
Hey, you want to? We can get a drink and talk. Like here with this sort of like, there's a bit more room for this is a performance. There's a bit of artifice here. Yeah. People are willing to go like, I bet this person doesn't actually hate themselves. In America, it's harder to do that. So I mean that's another thing I'd say if you're going over is if you do self-deprecating stuff, you gotta create a little more emotional distance between the material, because people will not be going along for self-abuse that long. Not as long as you're used to, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you can go on. Well, you can do the confidence stuff in the UK, but you just have to. In the UK we have to lower our status a bit. So we have to buy whatever it is, or even like successful comics that on TV names and stuff. They have to maintain some level of lower status than the audience. So if you're rich, then you have to find something about it. Are you older than the audience? Are you going to die before them or something? And you have to get clever around that, because you can't just say that. Oh yeah, it was really bad when I tried to buy a bottle of milk, but I didn't have 50p in my pocket to buy it. It doesn't work. People know the illusion's broken by that time. You're going back to the US soon, so what does the next year and beyond sort of hold for you?
Oh man, why'd you do that? I don't know yet. Like I said, I'm applying for academic jobs, and that's always very challenging because the market, there are positions out there, but you don't really get to pick where you are. You kind of have to take the job you can get a lot of times. So I don't really know what city I'm going to be living in yet. I've put it in for a couple of places. If it's a city or it's a town close enough to a city that has a comedy scene, I will definitely try to do some. Some of the jobs look more promising for that than others.
Okay.
And if not, it's going to be a year hiatus. And, that's not super fun for me, but that's how it goes sometimes, unfortunately. It's a big place.
Do you have any plans to come back to the UK?
At the moment, no, just because it's expensive to get home. If I'm being perfectly honest. I mean, I definitely want to come back at some point. Just 'cause I've made a lot of friends here, and I like the scene here. I was one of the lead organizers of the Cambridge Fringe last year. I'm helping a bit with the Fringe this year, 26th of May, be there. But I actually won't be physically here for the festival this time around. I'm moving before then. So I definitely at some point would like to come back for Cambridge Fringe just to see how it grows. Like, it'd be really cool to see something we started get bigger and more successful. And I think Ali and Dan, who are in charge of it, Ali Warwood, Dan Farmer, they've got a good vision for what the next couple of years can look like. And I think they're really, they're two people who are well suited to get a community event in Cambridge like that. Yeah. So it only looks positive, and I'm just excited to come back and see how it goes.
So that's a reason to come back alone.
That's a reason to come back. And then it's unlike a lot of festivals, it's a 1 day, maybe a 2 day in the future. So that's an easy visit rather than like in Edinburgh where it's a month-long commitment.
Some people take time off completely, like leave their jobs just to do it, stuff like that. But have you got anything else to plug?
Gosh, yeah. Well, I've got 2 more months of shows. So we do our open mic First Laughs. And if you go to facebook.com/First Laughs, you can sign up for that. We do that the first Tuesday of every month at the Tram Depot. We have our panel show at Thirsty in Mitcham Corner called The Best Medicine. Sort of like a interview / comedy advice thing. We got like 4 comics every time. It's always super fun. Cambridge Fringe Festival, 26th of May. Definitely go. It's going to be cool. Listen to this podcast. It's not really makes sense to plug it if you're already on it. Watch The Story of God on National Geographic. But this is the 3rd episode of season 3. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know when that's coming out? Do you know?
So in America, that comes out on Tuesday.
So you could probably get a bootleg version of it beforehand.
If you are inclined to do that, you may in fact go ahead and break the law. I would never condone such behavior. And then it'll be in the UK, I believe 5th of May is when the 3rd episode would air. But it'll be airing in the UK in May. And then I'm pretty sure UK Netflix gets it concurrently. We'll go get it in May as well. So you'll be able to watch it on there, which is wild to think of. A friend of mine realized that they can play 6 Degrees of Separation from Kevin Bacon with me now. Because I technically will be on IMDb, sort of. So it's surreal.
Well, thanks for joining me, Joe.
No, thanks for having me, Luke. Appreciate it.
Well, I really enjoyed the conversation with Joe. It's a real good one for me. It's a real bittersweet, really, because although I'm sure he's going to go and do some amazing stuff in the US, it's a real shame to lose such an amazing comedian and a great guy, a good friend in Cambridge. But hopefully he will come back for the Cambridge Fringe Festival, which is run by Dan Farmer and Ali Warwood. And yeah, check out First Laughs. That'll be in the show notes too. And also Best Medicine, which hopefully will continue even after he goes back to the US. All the information of how you can watch him on The Story of God by Morgan Freeman will also be in the show notes too. For now, thank you so much for listening and take care. See you soon.